Welcome to the fourth episode of this video essay. In the video before this, we arrived at a conclusion that there seems to be tendencies in our societies to go to a sort of like a state of toxic rationality and go to a state in which hatred, anger and fear are utilized for political gains. And we also came to the conclusion that this all can be seen as mostly unrecognized or even unconscious third dimension of the visible forms of democracy, the separation of powers. And what actually speaks through these dangerous developments is that there is real power in it. But there seems to be real power in it, and yet there seems to be no checks and balances to moderate these tendencies or developments. I'm not a Jungian therapist myself, but I'm tempted to use here the concept shadow and shadow work. Because for me it seems that this is the shadowy side of our present-day politics. And of course if we carry the Jungian thought to the end, the next issue is that what kind of shadow work needs to be done in order to change these dangerous forces into something more productive and even possibly positive. With this video I will be going deeper to the details of these shady forces as they appeared in the late 19th century and early 20th century as historical entities of Soviet Communism and Fascism. The first one is almost like reviving a lesson from history, taking a glance at something that most likely will not return, at least so it seems at the moment. And this is of course Soviet communism. The second one is more acute at the moment, and that also means that I will be probably spending more time in this one, because there seems to be an emergency in trying to deal with it currently in the world. Looking back to the early part of the 20th century, the first 50 years of 20th century, it certainly looks like that century was the century of ideologies, especially with regards to controversial political movements that were also undemocratic and their respective ideologies. Political movements are always based on limited set or collection of political ideas. For example, the central ideas of modern conservatism boil down to promotion of traditional institutions, appreciating customs and values, while at the same time, surprisingly, quite contrary to these principles, modern conservatism also supports the idea of free markets without government interference. Another example which comes closer to me in terms of my personal life, especially my childhood, is social democracy, because my father used to be a social democrat and active in local politics. For those of you who are watching this from United Kingdom or United States, this may not be a political entity that you know that much about. In Central European countries, there has always been more or less prominent influence of these types of parties, social democratic parties, especially after the Second World War. For me, the basic idea behind social democratic parties is something that was first expressed by a sociologist, Max Weber. Basically, in it, the idea is that political decisions should be made in a way that there is a sense of social responsibility in the way that they're made, and that markets cannot guarantee a humanly decent society. There are also attempts of socialization involved with it. Changing assets to social assets via taxation. And this is to create a wealth in society that is more evenly distributed across different parts of population, and thus creating a society that at least economically is more just. On its heydays, social democracy was a movement against the lure of communist ideas. In it we can keep capitalism but humanize it with programs that prevent large parts of population becoming what Marx called the lumpen proletariat, the poorest of the poor of the laborers. Social democracy and modern conservatism are two political movements that are firmly within the framework of normal workings of Western democratic societies. In contrast to these, Soviet Communism and Fascism were and are outside democratic processes. I do not think that the word ideology is the best way to try to describe communism and fascism. For the purposes of the philosophical argument of this essay, I have another concept in mind, and for that concept I have to thank a British journalist and a political commentator, Andrew Moore, who used it in BBC documentary The History of the World when he was talking about communism and fascism. He used the word pseudo-science, not ideology, but pseudo-science. This concept, pseudo-science, is a very good concept with what we're trying to deal with. I don't know if you're familiar with the prefix pseudo, what it means, so just in case I go through what it refers to. Pseudo refers to something that tries to pass as something, but ultimately it is fake or not valid. So in this case it means that these two ideologies ultimately do not meet the standards of science. Let's start with Soviet communism and the science behind it. In the end, this ideology or pseudoscience has nothing to do with carefully constructed scientific experiments, scientific data or scientific discoveries, or theories that are supported by empirical evidence. there is rather a fairly dubious postulate of assuming that history moves through groups of people involved with actions that are fundamentally antagonistic. There is a group that has certain kinds of actions and goals, and another group that has different ones, and history gets its engine or transformative power through these antithetical actions in different groups involved in clashes, whether these clashes are cultural, social, military, whatever. This is basically a justification for class war, that there is the class of bourgeois, there is the class of laborers. This form of pseudoscience is based on a crude and questionable interpretation of equally questionable philosophy by Hegel. If you know your Marxism, you know that Karl Marx's dialectical materialism is based on ideas stemming from Georg Friedrich Hegel. And Karl Marx himself admits it. He says that his materialism is Hegel's idealist philosophy turned to its head. I look at this form of philosophy and the philosophies behind fascism as someone who has grown to be a thinker, who is very much influenced and informed by major philosophers from a century after the time of Karl Marx and Georg Friedrich Hegel, the century after them. For me, any form of human exchange, including economical exchange, are just sets of families of different types of games. For me, human interaction should be looked like loosely defined family of games. And if this doesn't seem to make sense to me, just think of it. You know, why I use loosely defined family? Because if you think of a game, tennis, how different is tennis from chess, for instance? When the kind of worldview that I have internalized looks at us in the way that during our daily lives we very swiftly move from one mood of one language game to another. And for any human who's just woken up and goes about doing his daily chores, you do not necessarily recognize these games, these different types of games. Rather, it is the mood, in the Heideggerian sense, that you somehow recognize. And let me give you an example. Let's say that you're just woken up, and the first mood is sort of like erotic attunement that you have with your partner, if that is the right language to use here. And after that one, you turn on your television and you see that there is a new political scandal, and then you have moral indignation stirring up inside of you. So what I'm trying to say here is that when it comes to our daily lives are constructed in a way that we move from one language game to another language game. From one situation to another, there is another language game waiting for us. And in connection to these language games, there is also certain like attunement, certain atmosphere that we sort of like latch into. That's how human life works for me. And with this understanding of human life, a completely different kind of picture appears. And the picture that appears is that our modern lives, post-market economic societies, are very complex things, with lots of different points of view, lots of different interest groups, lots of different takes on things, depending on what kind of profession you have, what kind of background you have, what kinds of interests you have, what kind of lifestyle you have. And from that point of view, these ideas by Hegel and Marx are crude simplifications of our lived experiences, of the true complexities of our way of existing, our everyday lives. And if we let go of these abstract ideas of Hegel and Marx, you can really go into the depths of everydayness of our lives. And that is much more valuable than this looking at from above these abstract views. Here we have a perfect segue to the fact that there is intellectual attractiveness in this Marxist way of thinking. Marxist ideas have certain intellectual attractiveness in them. I'm not surprised at all that certain kind of people, intellectuals, academics, are attracted by this way of thinking. It is a very fascinating way of looking at the world, but nevertheless, it is a pseudoscience based on an unfounded postulate. And if we take a little bit deeper look and follow the rabbit hole of a communist thinking, the same way that year of reign of terror was engulfed by rationality that had gone toxic, or rationality that had left it boundaries of healthy rationality. There seems to be something similar in communism. Just think of it, how communist ideology was applied in Soviet Communism in its heydays, during the reign of Stalin. If we look more closely to that form of society at that era, the height of Cold War era, there is something monsterly in the reasoning behind Stalin's gulags. Because indeed it makes sense to do away with a whole generation of people who, by their upbringing, social status, or just by their human disposition, pose danger to communist revolution. This is all for now. I will try to analyze fascist pseudoscience in the next 2 episodes. There's an emergency in this, much more now at this present day, because there's a great deal of not just scientists and experts who are concerned about this, but also ordinary people. Ordinary people are really worried about the survival of Western democracies. And indeed there are indicators currently pointing to the revival of either fascism or authoritarianism, revival of culture of strongmen. That's all for today. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Press either the subscribe button or like button. Both of them help me to continue to make these videos. For now, All of you have a wonderful day in whichever part of the world you are. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.